And we're back, just like that. Welcome back. G'day, George.
G'day. How are we?
Yeah, doing pretty well. Had a bit of a mare on Friday night for people who are watching with our audio and video on my end kind of ballsed up. So in the chat, when you join us, feel free to shout out if anything goes on. We think we've solved the issue here in my studio, but if there's any issues, you will be the first to let us know, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm good, George. How are you, man? You had a good weekend?
Yeah. Went up the line a little bit to Seacliff to look at the patch of land where the asylum used to be up there.
Yeah, and that was a place Janet Frame ended up being there. Is that right? She was up there for a wee while.
Yeah,
it's a pretty spooky place, eh? Up that long road and kind of, but it's got a great view.
It's massive as well. That building, like the old building, was epic. If you look at old photos of it, but of course it was. There was problems with the ground that they built it on. There was obviously a fire and just the general unpleasantness of an asylum back then.
Yeah, I guess it kind of goes without saying, isn't it? It's not like you hear many. Was it one of those happy asylums or unhappy ones? I think it's kind of a given, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So good to be back with you. Monday evening. A lot been going on over the weekend. Of course, congrats to the All Blacks. A big win over the weekend. Spoiler alert if you still got it in your DVR, but too bad. I got to say, it's very interesting to hear the New Zealand media all of a sudden go, once again, the All Blacks are the best rugby team in the world because they won one game. They've lost 5 of their last 6, and all of a sudden they're heroes again. And I also think, and I just say this as an Irishman from 2 generations ago, is that this idea within New Zealand rugby that we should always win is unbelievably disrespectful to the opposition. And maybe at the moment we are the 3rd, 4th, 5th best rugby team in the world. And maybe we just have to actually live with that. Pull up our big boy girls pants and actually live that we're not the number 1 team in the world at the moment. And we had a great win in the weekend and just leave it there without kind of going, it's good to see us back on top again when, there's a long way to go. Anyway. We don't really do sports. I've had a couple of times, George, where I've talked to a couple of sports reporters going, come and talk to us about it. And it's never really happened. We had F1. We did F1 that one night, didn't we?
Yeah.
The guy from the UK.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah. One of our first guests.
Yeah. Anyway, if you're watching tonight on whatever platform you're on, you can participate by chatting. When you chat in your chat engine on your platform that you're watching, you have the ability for it to pop up on our screen, and then we can share it, just like we're doing right now with David, who says evening all. I have to be honest with you, Facebook doesn't interact quite as well with our software as YouTube does. So if you're sending a comment or a question in on Facebook, it'd be quite good to put your name in the comment as well, just in case it doesn't come up. For some reason, the connection between Facebook and our software, it just says Facebook user a lot of the time, and we don't know who sent it. So if you make a comment on Facebook, add your name to the comment. Other than that, if you're watching on Twitch or Twitter or YouTube, just comment away questions and comments, and we do and often kind of share them through the show. This evening, we are going to be talking. We've got kind of 3 things to talk about. It depends on the length of conversation we go with the first thing as to what happens with the second 2 things. But we want to talk a little bit about the accusations in the Labour Party about the bullying. We kind of want to test it, and we want to, as we always say, walk and chew gum at the same time and have a look at it, especially because we did look so heavily at the National Party claims last week. Is there a parallel? There seems to be a lot of both siding it at the moment. National did this, so Labour should do this. Is that warranted? Yes or no? So we'll get a chance to look at that. But also, speaking of that, Christopher Luxon was on one of the weekend shows, I think, on News Hub with a 25-minute conversation and had some quite interesting things to say about National Party selection processes. So I don't sort of want to start the week with how we started last week, which was Sam Uffindell, but because the conversation from the weekend kind of referenced that back, it's not necessarily about Mr. Uffindell. It's more about how the National Party is run. That's kind of the subject matter from the conversation he had on News Hub that I wouldn't mind having a look at today. Now, if, for example, we go ballistic and we just chat about our first topic for the whole hour or for 40 minutes, or we might bring some of those back tomorrow, because they're both kind of conversations that can pick up on. And if we don't talk about them tonight, to be honest with you, there'll probably be more information in the next 24 hours for us to pick up on tomorrow night. So that's about it. That's sort of the summation of the show. As I said, just participate by commenting on the platform you're watching us on. Simon says, good evening, Pat and George. When is the local candidates in Rotorua turned out? He was the parliamentary protest, eh? Sorry,
one of the local candidates was at the parliamentary protest, I think Simon means.
And from the Ratepayers Association. Look, this is exactly one of the things we're going to talk about, Simon. We're going to talk about, and let's just bring Sanjana in right now. Good morning, sir. Evening, sir. Hello. Let's say hello.
Yeah. How's it going?
Good. Sanjana Hattotuwa is joining us from the Disinformation Project, and a bunch of other things you do as well. But we want to have a chat with you tonight about Simon sort of brought up an issue already to do with one of their candidates being at the protest. And the Stuff Circuit documentary has just been released. Fire and Fury? Yeah, it's Fire and Fury, which is primarily about the main leaders in New Zealand of the dis and misinformation circuit. And it's kind of cornerstones itself around those that were at the I keep wanting to say January 6th committee, ironically. Keep wanting that we're at Wellington for the so-called Freedom Camp. And so, yes, so Simon's already mentioned about a candidate in Rotorua being at that protest. So we want to talk about candidates and the danger of mis and disinformation candidates getting in, but also we want to have a look at that Stuff documentary as well, which I know you've seen. And I'm hoping, and in fact, I'm pretty sure I do, but Paula Penfold has been on with her last two documentaries, my podcast, not this, but my podcast. So actually, I think we probably will get Paula at some stage and we'll talk in more detail about the process of that documentary. But for those of us who are just spectators to it, I thought we might have a chat about it. And for you, who through the Disinformation Project, obviously is an inside understanding of what you're seeing, as opposed to those of us who are just spectators, we might talk to it. So can we just start there? I know it might be a bit of a simplistic question for yourself, but just tell us exactly what the Disinformation Project is. What do you guys do?
Well, for many, dis and mis would be interchangeable. Yeah. That would be a mistake. For many also, it might not be immediately obvious that I'm not Kiwi. I come from Sri Lanka. And what we now call disinformation or misinformation or infodemic or information disorders in the early 80s in Sri Lanka, we just call government propaganda.
Right.
That is the context that I grew up in. And after the advent of social media, things got much more complicated, but remained rather familiar for those of us who grew up with the nature and the nurture of propaganda in a country such as Sri Lanka. Disinformation builds on that. And I'm talking in very personal terms. I mean, there's the academic discourse, which really nobody bloody understands. Having done a PhD, neither do I. Disinformation really is about people, and they are always a few people who are strategic, sophisticated, highly motivated, and intentionally produce, promote, and propagate content over now a variety of social media platforms, such that those who consume it are beguiled into thinking that what they promote and frame and project are true.
Yeah.
And so that's the distinction. Those who create the content are very often in full knowledge of what they are doing and what the end state of what they want to get at, which makes them very dangerous. those who consume are not always of the same caliber or of the same bent. Some of them may actually believe that to be true. And I just end by saying I take the case of my mom, who's now nearly 85. And in South Asia, we have what's called the auntie-uncle network. They're all now on social media. They're all usually on WhatsApp. And they care for each other, right? That generation is worried for their health. And, whenever they hear something, they, worry for their children, their grandchildren. And I call her Amma. And Amma usually sends me stuff that is completely wrong and false. But there is I say this because she, her blood pressure goes up. And so for my sister and my sister's in Sri Lanka, it is a health concern that my mom isn't harmed by what she would consume on WhatsApp, sometimes sent to her with good intent from a relative or somebody of her own age bracket. So the producer we know to be very strategic in what they do, but somebody like my mom who knows no better is consumed by the misinformation that she then goes on to share. So that's a very personal take on, I think, a very powerful question that many stumble over.
I've always understood, and get me if my layman's term is accurate, that disinformation is purposefully misinforming people, whereas misinformation is more, I'm wrong, but I'm not purposefully passing on stuff I know to be wrong.
They are broad definitions that I would agree with. You also have malinformation, and information disorders are really about the fact that you no longer can tell with any degree of accuracy or confidence, really, the nature and nurture, like where the content that one consumes came from, and the degree and the complexity around which that is shared. So, Pat, one of the things that, Facebook always comes up with acronyms, but people with my melanin level in the global south have suffered these harms for a decade more than captured the Western gaze and the Western news cycles. So when the 6th of January occurred in the United States in Capitol Hill, it might surprise you to know that people like myself have been researching the manner in which a platform or product surface like Facebook had been instrumentalized for violence for years before. Nobody listened to us. Nobody still listens to us. But now the harms have gone home to roost. But what Facebook did after the 6th of January was they created this new acronym called CSH, Coordinated Social Harm. That was an evolution of the first acronym immediately after the Capitol Hill insurrection that they called CAH, Coordinated Authentic Harm. And what these both try to get at is actually larger than Facebook, which is that, and it might frighten listeners and viewers, is that Facebook as a company or Meta as a company does not know what to do to prevent the harms that were germinated on its platform leading to the 6th of January up until today. That is the reality that we are living in. And as I said, it's not just Meta, it's all social media companies. So coordinated social harm is about people sharing stuff at pace, feverishly, in the billions of posts per second, when you take a global platform like Facebook, that they have no handle around. Now, all of them are not malevolent actors. Some of them are. But the problem is, and the academic distinction, you're absolutely spot on, Pat. But the problem is we talk about information disorders because you no longer can hold true those definitions with a clarity of purpose that gives meaning to the research that we do, because things are so confused and convoluted and complicated. Those strict academic buckets, as it were, don't really capture the nature of what we are studying every single day.
Gotcha. Let's have a look at the first part of the conversation that we're going to go into. Actually, I'm realizing that's all sort of surrounding Stuff and their documentary. Because the first part is actually a conversation that's been happening. I saw you having this conversation last week on TVNZ, but it's come out of the documentary. Anti-vax groups want to make New Zealand, quote, ungovernable, end quote, targets local body elections. Now, I saw you passing this out as a warning last week to people, and the conversation last week that I saw was about, and I've seen this in Dunedin, that especially where there's places where, say, there's 6 positions to fill, sometimes there might only be 5 candidates. So basically, it's a non-contestable election, and everybody just walks in the door. However, what we're also finding out, and I'll just read this out for the audio podcast as we look at the audio, as the page on stuff. Any anti-vaccination, anti-mandate group which says it wants to make the country ungovernable, and anti-vaccination, ungovernable, is standing candidates in local body elections to, quote, sway the results and throw our weight around. Voices for Freedom openly campaign to get supporters into decision-making positions, but told candidates to hide their affiliations, prompting a warning to voters to thoroughly research candidates before voting. Now, this is kind of what has happened in the US with various Republican local body elections. Roe versus Wade is a really good example. In 73, when that was passed, they've basically taken the next 50 years of slowly taking up more and more local body elections until basically the Republican Party now controls local body politics in America. Pretty much, if you look at all the local positions that are in your local town in the US, majority of them are Republican people who are in those positions. And when I hear that, that's what I think. I think, okay, so this time around, so someone gets in, no big deal. But in 10 election cycles, that, if it continues on, might make a huge difference. What do you think?
I agree with you. And it's a pity, in a sense, that we're having this conversation now when we should have been having it much earlier. I mean, not you and I, but I'm talking about the country.
Yeah.
With Aroha, one of the things that I see in Aotearoa is an inability to see democratic threats for what they are, because of a variety of factors, I would imagine, as a consequence of having a strong democracy and institutions and a high trust society and its geographic exceptionalism, really at the other end of the world, you don't have to worry about too much. The experiences of the lives that we've led that are etched with a democratic deficit and societal harms are alien. It's an alien vocabulary to Aotearoa. And the single most often the pushback that I get is that this is not us and this will not happen to us. And there is no path dependency around any of this. There is no astrology. There is no fortune teller that can say that Aotearoa 10 years or 15 years down the line is going to be the same as the United States today. However, I agree with you and concur that the life that I've led and the lives of the Global South would offer a caution around the significant danger of what we are seeing today. And I'm being very deliberate in what I say and how I say it. This is the thin edge of a wedge.
Right.
This is the introduction of a cancer that is going to metastasize. There is no if and or but about it. This is what I have called in other forums a digital Novichok, in that it is an invisible nerve agent that harms society by the one thing that you don't realize is actually something quite important in society, which is attention. And it's in the capture and retention of attention around harms and misinformation and conspiratorialism that seeps its way into our political fabric and our democratic fabric through local government, that you find what you said in the framing of the question, that 10 years down the line, what many have said after Roe v. Wade in Aotearoa, which is that things here are settled, I find quite odd, because if anything, Aotearoa should know as a tectonic country that nothing is settled. Things change. And here you find the design of a longer term end state. This is very dangerous. It's very harmful. And it will impact national level politics. But let me be very clear. We don't have to talk about its impact at the national level or a dystopian end state to be concerned. What does local government do? It's a public glue. It's a community pool. It's a library. It's a connective glue. It's the parking. It's the bicycle path. It's what you can do to combat climate change in the little things that cities and towns and wards can and must do. And so when you think about it, local government is actually quite important, even though people don't think it is important. And our gaze, our fixation is always around the parties at the beehive or who want to get into the beehive. Here, though, you find a strategic design, and that, Pat, is what I really want to stress. This is highly strategic. This is not offhandish commentary. This is not something that you got up on a bad hair day and thought that I will say. When you study disinformation, when you study information disorders and the resulting democratic deficit, when you have lived it, you come from an end state that allows you to see where the beginnings are. And these are the seeds of harm. You have to see it as a strategic, sophisticated, intentional, highly motivated, and very possibly well-funded, including very possibly from, though I can't say with any certainty, coming out of the country as well, designs and funding streams that are intended to undermine democracy in Aotearoa 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
We've got it. Oh, you go, George, sorry.
Sanjana, I'm interested in the language you use, and I guess like as a fellow academic, we use these sort of, I don't know, maybe it's beyond analogy, but you use these medical and viral terms to talk about disinformation. What do you think about that? Where does that come from? Are there parallels when we talk about maybe your early days in terms of government propaganda in Sri Lanka in terms of that language? And does it affect the way we sort of we tackle disinformation? There's a lot there, but specifically I'm interested in that language you use to describe this issue.
I use nature, surf, sea, sand, landscapes, forests, trees, and ecosystems. I use, technically it's called murmuration, but it's just birds flocking or shoals of or schools of fish to help people understand what is both a computational thing, it's a research, it's a very complicated research design. And it just, if you talk about it in academic terms, which I absolutely detest, it goes right above the head of the vast majority of people. And that's not the bloody point of doing this. And I detest academia and academic papers in the main because you have this echo chamber that really doesn't help anybody other than yourself. I mean, our whole business is to understand something and to communicate it such that our societies are better as a consequence. And it's, I've told others, colleagues at the Disinformation Project, I go to bed every day with a profound, it's not the listener's luggage to carry, but as a Sri Lankan, I think most Sri Lankans go to bed now with a profound sadness around where their country is today. That I don't think is quite well known or well enough in Aotearoa, but it's a country that has collapsed and imploded. And if you take, George, a look at where we are today, in my life, right? I was born in 1977, so the cascade effect of a war, a catastrophic 30-year-old war, and then the post-war conundrums, and then the disinformation, and then the architecture of politics and how we got there, you find that it really is like a virus, which is something that predates actually coronavirus or COVID-19, but now, of course, has greater resonance because more people understand super spreaders and, how this thing, goes from a very small group and then infects a much larger community. But we started talking about it as a virus for much earlier. And that was kind of an attempt to also beg, to plead the likes of Meta, it's now called Meta, but it's called Facebook, to kind of help us. It's not about deleting Facebook, which I think is a white privilege-laden term and phrase and idea. We can't delete Facebook because it's integral and inextricably entwined in our DNA in terms of society, culture, politics, and marriage, and love and sex, and everything that you can think of. But we wanted the company to help us. And the way we kind of communicated was, listen, you are creating a virus. You are creating something that you yourself can't control. And if you don't get this right with us, you're going to face the consequences. And we actually literally told them. This was years before the 6th of January, 2021. And so I find that, George, when I use these terms, when I use the way that language that I use to talk about these issues, it may not communicate the nature of what we do in terms of the data science and the very serious nature and the complicated nature of what we do. But you communicate an idea, and that's what the Stuff Circuit documentary has done over the weekend, right? I mean, I tweeted at least minutes before this broadcast went live that it's a gift to the country insofar as what I and colleagues at the Disinformation Project have seen and suffered as a consequence of having to study for a year is now the conscience of a country.
Yeah. It's
much worse today, Pat and George, but you have now a foundation, a starting point, a vocabulary, a frame, and a set of individuals, horrific things that you had to listen to that are real. They're not going away. You can't be an ostrich and say, this is not our Aotearoa, this is our Aotearoa. The whole point of playing back those messages was it's not a construct or a figment of the mainstream media's imagination. They were defined by what they said. So let's take them at their, what they say, and let's take them for what they say they are. And so, all of this put together, I think, is helpful to promote and understand as a virus, particularly in a post-pandemic time, because it does capture the imagination of people, and it helps carry on a discussion that otherwise gets rarefied into abstract terms that really are a disservice to, at the end of the day, also how interesting all of this is, right? I mean, it's not frightening, it's also bloody fascinating.
I've got a question here. This is more kind of a question from outside. It's sort of been answered in the text, but I want to put it out there for people who aren't in the text or maybe watching this on demand. Bradley says, so you think someone who has attended a protest shouldn't be allowed to stand for office? And I guess if I was to answer Bradley, I would say anyone's entitled to stand for office, but I want to know who they are and what they stand for. And in this current day and age, when things like vaccines and, mis and disinformation is out there, if someone has a deep belief in those things, and if it's the reason they're standing for office, like we just read the article about Voices for Freedom, I would like to know that before I vote for them. So I think if someone has those beliefs, then the honest thing to do would be to stand on those beliefs and tell the public, if you vote for me, this is what you're going to get. I think what we get from the documentary, which we're now going to get into, and also the article based from that documentary, is we've got the Voices for Freedom people actually saying, don't tell anybody what you believe. Keep it a secret. And then when you get in power, we can make things the way we want it. So I don't have a problem with anyone running. Look, I'm doing probably 11 conversations over 6 weekends with 11 mayoralty candidates in Dunedin. I've already started researching them, and trust me, there is a breadth of belief amongst them with all sorts of issues. Believe what you want, but I want to know what you believe if I'm going to basically endorse you by giving you my vote. Would that be fair, Sanjana?
Yes, I would. I mean, the question went too fast for me to. I mean, obviously, that's I would completely agree with you. I mean, the thesis of that question would then render, I think, in any country, the vast majority of a population, I would think that in a democracy who would have stood up for something in a protest in their lives would be debarred from standing up for public office. So that's not what any of us are saying. I mean, I would concur with you wholeheartedly, Pat, that you need to be upfront about what you stand for. And if you're anti-science, anti-mandate, and anti-vax, I mean, it's offensive for me as a person of color coming from a region that lost millions without the vaccination, and billions of lives. We are talking about the world's largest, in a couple of years, it will be the world's largest population in India. Billions of lives were saved as a consequence. So the whole point of this exercise is to save lives. And if then the belief that you have, by the way, Pat and George, it now goes beyond, and that's what we're seeing as well. The current belief around the mRNA is extending to MMR, right? It's extending to all vaccinations. It's extending to all public health mandates. It's extending to all of what the government would say about any kind of health advice that they would give. That's not good, right? So that's the natural evolution of what we are seeing. If that's what you're about, then I think that the voter should be aware of that. And be able to make up their minds about that, but be upfront about it.
Yeah, because what I'm saying is, I'm not even saying don't be nefarious. I'm saying, like, if this is your reason for running, if this is what you passionately believe in, it's the reason behind why you're running, then that should be actually what you're running on. If you're someone who's running because you don't want three waters to happen, then from the top of the rooftops, you should be screaming no to three waters. If you're running because you don't want mandates, that's what you should be running on. So anyone can run. Just run on why you're running. Be honest about why you're in there and what you're doing it for. That's I guess.
And be honest about your connections, because I think the article made it out to the public, but we have been studying this for a while, which is that the people and the network that is promoting them doesn't want their name there. So why is that?
Yeah.
Why do you want a cloak and dagger? This is this is sort of like a theater, like you're in the backstage or in the wings, directing the acting on the stage, but you don't want to be seen. Yeah. Now that to me smacks of something that is going awry.
Yeah. Let's have a look now, seeing we've talked about it a couple of times. This is the 30-second trailer for the documentary that's on Stuff. And I think, Sanjana, when I hear you talking about sort of this gives a picture to what you guys are talking about and what now this is an essential for every New Zealander to see right now. Like, because what this does very, very accurately is this does show, like, put it this way, I'm someone who's kind of entrenched in this because I'm in news every single day, right? I'm deep in it. And I saw things in this documentary that made me go, holy shit. I had no idea Telegram was as bad as that. I'm not on Telegram, but I had no idea it was as bad as was shown. So even for someone like me, who's really in this conversation almost every day, my eyes are opened. So I guess I would only say, not being arrogant to say that I know more than other people. It's not that. But if I'm in the weeds every day and my eyes were opened, then you being in the weeds, you not being in the weeds, this documentary will give you the wake-up call that perhaps you need if you don't think so. So I think everyone should watch it. And if you want to watch it, just go to stuff.co.nz and it's on Play Stuff, which is where my podcast is. You'll find it somewhere in there. It's pretty easy to find at the moment. So let's just have a look at this. Is just 30-second promo, and I think this is a moment actually I haven't actually watched the promo yet, but this is Paula Penfold here, and I think this is at the end of the protest when the police had gotten the people out of Parliament's grounds, and the people then turned on reporters. So Paula Penfold, petite, small female, surrounded by men, basically telling her to get the fuck out. So we'll just have a look at this, and then I want to ask you about this because there's some things you've told me that I want to check up on. So here's a 30-second preview to the documentary on Stuff.
We don't need your fake news.
This is a time that favors falsehood.
Journalism is irredeemably corrupt.
Outrage.
This is all bullshit.
Execute the bastards.
And sensational fringe opinion.
You're going to go to jail soon.
Can strut the gallows.
I'm not averse to a beheading liberty.
Any reasonable New Zealander would listen to that and be deeply shocked by it.
New Zealand politicians will fear for their lives, and rightfully so. Have a good one.
So there you go. As I said, I think everyone should go and check it out. Sanjana, I think you said something to me which I want to check and I want to expand upon. I think you're not anything to do with this documentary. You're not.
No.
They haven't talked to you. You're not a part of it. But I think you said the last 72 hours, in other words, since the documentary has come out, you have received more death threats, more correspondence, more action of serious nature around your work than at any stage. Am I correct in that?
The 72 hours, just for the sake of historic purposes, were the Saturday, August the 13th, when the trailer was released by staff, through to today, when we are talking, which is the 15th of August, 2022. So in that 72-hour period, for the past year that I've been studying disinformation and information disorders in Aotearoa, New Zealand, every single day, without a break, the 72-hour period that has just passed resulted in, as a consequence of the Stuff Circuit documentary, the greatest expansion and amplification of harms against actually the person in the documentary who represented the Disinformation Project, and also my colleagues in the Disinformation Project as well. And so it's a cornucopia of harms that we are very familiar with. So there's nothing new insofar as what was targeting us and who was targeting us, but it was just the sharp rise in violent rhetoric that was anchored to a response around what the documentary platformed over the weekend.
Out of interest, and you know this, and people who watch this know that Byron Clark we talk to fairly regularly and get kind of updates. He's had some interactions which he's needed to, check his security on. Are any of these threats that you and your team are receiving, are any of them credible, or is it just keyboard warriors behind their, in their mum's basement in Hamilton, just sending out vile rhetoric, or is it something that police have been notified on? There are situations where you need to be careful. Is it a genuine threat?
We all have police files. If that's one answer to your question, it's an interesting question because it. And again, I don't want to spoil it for viewers who haven't seen it. But I think it's a segue, Pat, if I may, and beg your forgiveness for entering into this, but it's a segue to, I think, my one slight critique of the documentary, which is a larger critique of the way that Aotearoa is approaching disinformation, which is to look at it in terms of a national security perspective. And that is valid because I think it's resonant, it's emotional, and as a consequence of March 2019, that is the immediate response of the country, of the government of all of civil society, to kind of go back to March 2019 and say, my God, disinformation may result in something like that occur again, and we must do everything that we can. And then that leads to your question around credible threats. And the thing is, how the bloody hell do you know, in a sense? I mean, we don't know. I mean, you're not talking to police. You're talking to some Sri Lankan, you're talking to some Kiwi who are in their homes or in their offices doing what we do, which is, fairly serious work, but having to deal with the nature and nurture of harms, threats, and violent rhetoric that you would, if you are an MP or a head of state, also be very familiar with, but we don't have that protection. And I'm sorry to say that, even with the police, it's kind of generationally behind. If you go to 105 to report a harm around something that was targeting you online, it asks you for a physical address. The whole form looks at it as if it was from the 1990s. So, quite literally in terms of just the web design of it all, it's generationally lagging. And that gives you an idea into the mentality of some of the stuff that academics like myself and many others in this country are having to deal with, Byron Clark included, for no other sin other than for studying the erosion of social cohesion in Aotearoa. So who the hell knows what is credible and not? I don't. But we do have measures of seriousness, Pat. That is not to say that we treat every threat in a similar fashion. There are, as I said, individuals and networks, and some of them might be monikers, so some of them may be real names, some of them may be completely pseudonymous or anonymous, but they do have account handles, are known, frequently target us with extremely violent rhetoric. And there's a significant gendered dimension to this as well. The head of the Disinformation Project gets by order of magnitude, including, I must stress, including around the Stuff Circuit documentary, that person is the single most targeted individual in the entire repertoire of individuals featured in that documentary. And that's quite significant. And then that gives it gives license, it gives a permissive environment. And because there's no pushback, Pat, you're not on Telegram, I'm on Telegram every day. It's a hellscape, right? It's what I've called a Dantean hellscape of harm. I mean, I literally cannot share with you, but a few of us have to go to sleep with what we see. And I can assure you that it is worse than what listeners and viewers would imagine. This is almost like the 51st state of the United States on Telegram in terms of the degree of harms that you would associate with QAnon, with violent rhetoric, with hate, with the complete elimination, evisceration of voices that one disagrees with, in ways that just today I was thinking, I mean, I'll use myself as example, I was laughing away at the way in which they wanted me to suffer something. And it was quite imaginative because you have to laugh at this, right? And so if you have a community in the hundreds of thousands, this is not a small community, that is engaging with this violent rhetoric day in, day out, in communities that were originally, Pat, anti-vax, but are now almost indistinguishable from communities and definitions that you would normally associate with violent extremism, then my fear is what happens to our Rangatai? What happens to people who are pulled into this? And what are the questions that we need to be asking as a country in order to avoid the worst of what we see elsewhere? That those countries, mine included, never thought we would be having to face. And this is going to come quicker than many and most think. So these are some of the things that, we carry with us as researchers that are not often recognized. But I don't want to swear, but who the hell knows what credibility is and what a credible threat is? It is a frightening space for women to be in, for females who are doing this. It is a positively chilling space for a trans person, a queer person, a non-binary person, an LGBTIQ plus person, a person of color, an immigrant, anybody who is not heteronormative, white, pakeha, or seen to be alpha male is an aberration. And so you kind of have to accept that. And those people who are researchers in this field who are from those communities have to deal with that every day. So there's something quite significant in terms of the toll that it takes, Pat and George, that we don't often talk about. But I think I just wanted to place that on record, that these people are doing the best they can in very difficult circumstances. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Kiwis who have been doing this for much longer.
Sorry, George, have you got something? You get your mic on.
No, I mean, I especially liked the point before, which is something that we've mentioned in the past, that there's sort of the responses from some people is like, oh, we need a better, basically, security state to tackle these things, when by and large it's a matter of community and it's a political matter. It's not, I was very surprised by some people who I thought would know better, that the answer to the attacks in Christchurch was, some sort of Patriot Act or something like that. It was a sort of funny time there for a bit, among other reasons, that the discourse around that. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that again, that I thought that was a good point.
Can I say as well, one of the things the documentary did very well, because there is some rhetoric and there's the co-opting of language that some of these groups do that happens. There's some rhetoric in the campers at Parliament, and they were like, this is not about vaccines, this is about mandates. Yeah. And then one of the things the documentary did very well is go back before COVID and found a whole lot of clips from these same people going on podcasts, making public statements, going out and being very anti-vax. So I mean, George will testify to this. We said from day one here that that was not an anti-mandate protest. It was an anti-vaccine protest primarily. And the other thing is, like, not to get into the debate about the obvious, but I was talking to someone today, and you know, when someone says something quite simple, and you kind of go, yeah, shit, that's a really good point. Because they'd had a conversation with someone who wanted freedom, and the person I was talking just went, well, what about my freedom to get vaccinated? What about my freedom to wear a mask? Like, when I walk into a sitting wearing a mask and no one else is, and they all look down their nose at me, what about my freedoms as well, if I want to do that? And I just thought it's really interesting that we have a group of people who say things like, and this is, I looked at Chantel Baker's Facebook page tonight, and she was talking about, you know, there was no representation, and we just want to have our voices heard. And what about both sides of the conversation? And I thought, well, hang on, what you're suffering, Sanjana, when you're getting people attacking you, is people going, mind your fucking business. I don't want to hear your side. So which is it? Do they want to have conversations where you hear both sides, or do they want to only have their side heard? And the reason they're saying both sides is because currently they're not getting representation on mainstream media. So the hypocrisy, the layers of hypocrisy you can go through and just go, hang on, wait. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. It just continues on forever, because if they want both sides, for example, then why are they coming after you? This is one of the sides. We're just talking about one of the sides here. The sides, you know what I don't think there's two sides, but you know what I mean. Whereas, yeah, it doesn't make any logical sense. But then again, it's not going to make logical sense, is it?
Actually, it does to those who believe them. So that's what really does your head in. What these people offer is an alternative way of looking at the world and understanding it. And Pat, I think it's wrong to dismiss that, because we are living in an anxious time. And what in existential crisis anybody wants to get is an assurance that they will be okay, that their whānau will be okay, that the future is not some incomprehensible black hole which you're going to get sucked into and lose all agency around. And so it's not too different from the way the cults operate pre-social media. What these individuals, what these networks, what this content does is, in a sense, a new church, if you will, or a new temple, or a new mosque.
Yep, 100%.
And it gives them a way of understanding their role and relevance in the world. And so I wouldn't dismiss it all. It's quite insidious, but I wouldn't dismiss it as being illogical. It makes perfect sense to those who believe it. The other thing that I wanted to go back, I think you kind of made the point, but then you moved on to other important points as well, which is the co-optation of language.
Yeah.
Which is really important.
We're for freedom. What?
You know,
we're for freedom.
And may I say
we're patriots.
Yes, but I mean, you know, in light of what is said too often about war crimes and crimes against humanity, what the bloody hell are you talking about? Yeah. Because it's violent for somebody from a country like myself who has gone through war crimes and crimes against humanity and studied it and dealt with the communities who have been through it. This is not something that you just articulate in Aotearoa just because you're a Kiwi and you can.
Yeah.
That is violent because you have no bloody clue about what you're talking about. Yeah. And then you have this Nuremberg 2.0, and then you call it a Holocaust. You have the appropriation of things from history and other contexts. You deracinate meaning. You project it however you want. You create your own meaning, and then you use them willy-nilly. You know, in the scale of things, it might not really matter too much. But for those of us who have suffered through the real impacts of and lived experience of these terms, it is profoundly bizarre and extraordinarily violent to find them used in the context of stuff that has no relevance to the original term.
Hey, as I was watching the documentary as well, you mentioned cults and religious cults. I've had quite a lot to do with religious cults. It was sort of a, you know, you get into, in this day and age, you talk about going down the rabbit hole. Well, in the early 2000s, I was investigating all sorts of, you know, online stuff, cults, attended a few out of interest to have a look. And one of the things that I noticed in the documentary was basically what religious cults call love bombing. Yep. And love bombing in a religious cult, for people who don't know, is you'll turn up to a church service or whatever, and all of a sudden you've got 10 best friends, 10 new best friends, and they want to do everything with you, and they want you to come to their parties, and they want you to come to their services, and there's a camp this weekend, all these things. And then certainly that turns into it, and I'm thinking of one particular church in Auckland that I went to a few times out of interest, that turns into we've got a space in our flat, you should come and live in our flat, we've got a space in our flat, and then all of a sudden you don't have any other friends, and all you've got is people from this church. And then that turns into, we only date within our church, and then that turns into, and then you're in, and then what happens is you can't get out of it. And I've seen this in the flat earth community as well, because once you sell your soul to an ideology and they are the only people you interact with, to get out of that ideology, all of a sudden you've got no friends left, you've already alienated your family, and it's a really hard thing to do. So when you said religious cult, I'm like, I actually saw that in the documentary, and it resonates very heavily with me about some of the tactics I've seen religious cults use. I think this has turned into a full hour show. Hope everyone's okay with that. I'm enjoying it immensely. And so this is all we're doing today. We're just going to talk to Sanjana, and we're going to wrap it up. But I tell you, there's something I did want to talk a bit about. And there was a moment in the documentary, and I don't have it and I'm not showing it, but I'll just explain it, where a 60-something-year-old woman who had never been to a protest, worked in the healthcare area, and she lost her job because of the mandates, right? She was there because she wanted freedom.
Well, she lost her job because she didn't want to get vaccinated.
Correct. So because of the mandate. So yes, didn't want to get vaccinated, which, as we know, is a choice. I've spoken to a few of these people, Sanjana, and one of the things I always say when they say they're forcing us to get vaccinated, I said, so when are you getting vaccinated? And they go, well, I'm not. So they're not forcing you then. There's no force being used here. So when are you booked in? No, I'm not going to do it. So why aren't you doing it? Well, because you're choosing not to. So there's choices and there's no forces. Yes, it might be a coerced choice. I get that, but so is me putting on my seatbelt. I much prefer to drive without a seatbelt on, but I'm coerced into doing it for the fine rather than my safety. Anyway, so this lady attended the protest in Wellington. And then at the end of it, purely by chance, she was caught on Stuff's camera as being one of those people that I showed the clip of, basically going, get the fuck out of here, being really aggressive. Now, I'm not saying she was violent. There was no physicality to it, but certainly her language and her actions evoked violence. Let's say, can I say that? Like aggression, like this mild-mannered, I presume she was a nurse, maybe she wasn't, but mild-mannered health worker, 65-ish, 60-ish years old, just wanting to check it out, and she's doing it for her grandkids, turning into get the fuck out of here. And what it made me think, and this is what we can wrap up on today, not that we're in any rush here, is it the Milgram or the Milgram experiment? And for people who don't know what the Milgram experiment is, it's this experiment where, and here it is on Google. I'm actually going to show you a little bit of as well, where obedience was measured by the level of shock that the participant was willing to deliver. Whilst many of the subjects became extremely agitated, distraught, and angry at the experimenter, they nevertheless continued to follow orders all the way to the end. So what happened is, I think it's sometimes called the clipboard theory, that a person in a white coat with a clipboard can talk intelligent, willing people into doing horrific things. And I think I might have been watching the documentary today, and I saw January 6th, and I just thought, what did those people think 5 years before that? Will they ever thought they would have got here? What will they think 5 years from now? This is part of the original experiment that if you're watching us on video, this is from the 60s. And this man here is the one who's being tested. And the testing is, when the person in the other room gets a question wrong, he gives him an electric shock in incrementally higher numbers. Now, the person in the other room is just an actor, so it's not happening, but this person doesn't know that. And they continue to give the other person electric shocks almost until a deadly moment. I'll play you a little bit of this so you can see it if you haven't seen it before.
Cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
So he doesn't want to do it, yeah?
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called sharks harmless.
So that's what that was. And I thought there's a modern day context if people want to check it out. It's on Netflix. It's really interesting. It's called The Push. Have you guys seen The Push? Sanjana, have you seen The Push?
I've not seen The Push, no.
Okay, so The Push, and I'm going to turn the volume down because we'll get kicked off YouTube for doing it. The Push is Darren Brown, right? So Darren Brown sets up about social compliance, right? That guy in the red hair that you can see, that guy right there, he wants to see if he can force a person to commit murder. And what they do is they use a series of incremental instructions, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to see if they can set up to get that man, the subject who doesn't know everyone else is in on it, to push someone off the roof of a building. And the very first thing they start with is they have sausage rolls, yeah? And they don't order vegan sausage rolls. So the first instruction that guy complies with is just put some flags in the non-vegan ones and we'll just tell them they're vegan. And he complies. And he continues to comply until he gets to a decision at the end of the program of will he push this person off the roof or not and kill them, commit murder. And it's, I don't really want to tell people what happens. Okay, I won't tell you what happens with him, right? So that guy with the red hair, if you're going to watch it on Netflix, I won't tell you what happens with him, but I can tell you they show a bunch of highlights at the end. Believe it or not, most people push the guy off the roof. Most people murder someone based on an hour and a half of social conditioning. Now, you think about that and add that to the anti-vaxxer brigade, right? Everyone's jotting down now, the push, watch the push, got to watch the push. You think about that from the anti-vaxxer. The vegan sausage roll might be something really simple like, oh, mandates, don't like mandates. That might be the vegan sausage roll. The end of it is setting up a gallows on Capitol Hill looking for, that might be the push off the building, is looking for Mike Pence because you want to hang him. And these things happen, and the social contagion or the social conditioning is something very real. Before I make it sound too depressing, I also want to say he's done another show, which is called The Sacrifice, where he kind of does the opposite, and he wants to experiment. Will a stranger take a bullet for another stranger? So he does it's sort of the opposite. Will someone give up their life for a stranger? And it's not just a stranger. This guy here that you're seeing on screen, if you're watching, he's a bit of a Trumpian, right-wing, anti-immigrant guy. And would he take a bullet for an illegal Mexican immigrant? And again, it's a step by step by step by step by step. When you get to the end of the social conditioning, what will you do? And like I said, go and watch The Push. It's on Netflix. Go and watch. I think this is called Sacrifice. And have a look what it can do. And then think about your uncles and your aunts and the people who are posting on Facebook and where it's starting and where it could go. It's a fascinating experiment. It's a terrifying experiment. Like I said, I won't tell you what that guy and the main guy was for that push. One person doesn't know the experiment's going on. The other 100 people do, and they're acting to it. I'm not going to tell you what happened with him, but I will say clearly the majority of people who they tested ended up murdering someone, and it only took them an hour or so to be convinced to do it by what's going on around them. You're welcome to jump in now. That's I just wanted to kind of share that.
Well, now you sorted my Netflix viewing for the so that, and then the algorithm is useless. I mean, thank you for recommending it. When you were talking, at least in the first incarnation of what that chap was trying to do, my mind went to the 63 book by Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Benignity of Evil, how ordinary people can do the most heinous of things. And she's talking about the Third Reich, of course. It really is the case. And Pat, I don't know whether you remember this, but when Paula asks that person later on towards the end of the doco, and long after the protest, whether she thought she was being violent, she said, no, I wasn't being violent. That to me was the clincher, not actually what you pointed out, which was the clip from the protest site itself with her menacingly approaching the cameraman. And in the spirit and the heat of the moment, you could have argued that upon greater reflection and with the passage of time, she would have thought a bit about it and had a different answer. But the fact that she didn't think that she was being violent, for me, was the clincher. Right. That was the highlight of that segment. And that, in a sense, speaks to, in a sense, Pat, what you just articulated, which is social conditioning. And, there's a whole swathe of what we do and how we do it and what we study and where we study it and who produces and the form and shape it takes. That is around that. That is around how you get people to believe and think and then do things. And that is also, I know time is of essence here, but, one of the things that, another point that I diverged from is with Rebecca Kitteridge and her assessment of the threat. And George, I see you nodding, which is, of course, from a very NatSec perspective, right? So I'm not critiquing that. I'm just saying it for what it is. And the assertion, and by the way, it was both an assurance to Kiwis that they have 40 to 50 people in their gaze or radar, and that even though the temperature's gone up, she was, very assuring to Kiwis that, what she says is not commensurate with an increased risk to society. Now, I don't want to get into that, but it was interesting for me that it ended there. And that it goes back to what I said earlier, because so much of this is from an NatSec perspective. What we bring to the table is, Pat, to suggest that what starts online never stays online.
Yeah.
What starts online always, through the shaping of your attitudes, perceptions, beliefs, reactions, and responses, invariably and indubitably ends up in offline consequences. That then is what disinformation is at its core. It is not something ever designed to stay online. It is always with a strategic end state of offline consequences that, in a country like Aotearoa, are going to impact your democratic fabric. Therein lies the rub.
George, I'm going to put some comments. Look, I have to be honest, there's been maybe hundreds, but certainly dozens of comments flying past the live chat. So I've got some of them that I'm going to share. George, do you want to throw anything in before we go to that? Because I think we're pretty much getting ready to wrap up. We're not in any rush. Sanjana, if you want to add things, if there's anything else we want to throw out there, though. Well, let's have a look at some of it, and you guys can comment on any of these.
My comment would probably be that. Oh, not that one there, but yeah, sorry, carry on.
I've just got a bunch. So this is just simple saying good piece and stuff today, which is the one we showed on the Voices for Freedom and their disinformation and hateful rhetoric, and how linked to Freedom TV, also how their content includes QAnon and other conspiracy groups. Kim says, such a wake-up call. We take democracy for granted. I think that's fair. Chilling is an understatement. These people really need to look at themselves. I work with an anti-vaxxer who is distancing himself from this lot. And look, I'll say again, and then, look, I don't want to cast any aspersions because I don't know these people you're talking about, Ro, but in general, anti-vaxxing is from an unscientific point of view, is like the vegan sausage roll, or it's the very first thing, and where it could end up is the thing that always concerns me a little bit. David says, watched Fire and Fury twice. First time took me 2 hours because it was so upsetting. Needed to step away several times. Another case of an necessary level of righteous anger. I do it for you. There are a lot of nutters amongst the anti-vaxxers, but some who chooses not to be vaccinated should never be associated with such nutters. Judge people by their actions, not thoughts. Well, I think that they're a little bit inseparable, because if you're an anti-vaxxer, if you're fighting against the vaccine, then your actions are things like when you're out in public, especially with the early iteration of COVID, we know that the latest BA5 gets past the vaccine somewhat, but the early iteration, that you're more of a risk to the people around you. So there are actions there that I think you can judge by being an anti-vaxxer. Josie Posey, It was really good, but this is about the documentary. It was really good, but still introductory and focused on what could be 100% substantiated. David says, anyone with anti-vax attitude is disinformed, deluded, and likely utterly deranged. Tiger says, just looked it up on YouTube. I guess this is the documentary, and found the doco as well as a few reaction vids from other side. Looks like I've got a bit of watching to look forward to. And finally, oh, look, there's another 30 comments in there which I haven't got to, but finally from the ones I've found. Nicole says, the push could reflect society in general and what governments have been doing for years, just saying. No, maybe not. I think the idea of that and the very clever thing that Darren Brown does, like I say, it's like the smallest thing to force someone to do first is how they get them in the door. The way they get people to push someone off a building and murder them, not really, because he's got a harness on, but you know what I'm saying, is escalates. And like I say, it takes them about less than 2 hours to convince some people to go from vegan sausage roll to literally pushing someone off a building. Less than 2 hours. Think of that. Less than 2 hours to do that. Think what 6 months of Uncle Fred getting things on Facebook might have done. If in less than 2 hours, someone can be convinced to push someone off a building. You know, think about it that way. If people are interested in the documentary, here we go. Play Stuff. So you just go to play.stuff.co.nz, or if you go to stuff.co.nz, you find Play Stuff on there. Fire and Fury is all there. You can find, oh, look at that. There's other good stuff there as well, like the Department of Conversation with Pat Britton. Yeah, that's on there as well. But it's not all about me, guys. Oh, come on, stop. It's not all about me. Stop it. No, stop. It's not all about me. That's there. But most importantly, Fire and Fury is on play.stuff.co.nz. And yeah, as I say, I think everyone should watch it. And I think it's a very good piece of journalism. And when people are complaining about not showing, somebody's smooth plug, someone not showing both sides, I think what it does quite well is it allows the people who they're focusing on to speak for themselves by using their words. So it does kind of have both sides because it's the subject matter's own words. Sanjana, do you want to wrap with anything? Do you want to leave us with any words of wisdom, pearls of amazement or something?
Well, I don't know what it is, but I think that it's a good moment to reflect on the nature of the country as a consequence of the Stuff Circuit documentary. I called it a gift. And it really is that. It gives us pause. It gives us stuff for reflection. It might, as I think I read a comment saying that it's 100% substantiated. It focuses on what is 100% substantiated and is introductory. But that's a good thing, because these conversations have no end goal. It's a process, right? It's with Fano, it's with community, it's with the family. And the hardest conversations are with our family. They're not at the beehive. They're with our mothers, our fathers, our brothers, our sisters, our lovers, our partners, who don't think around these issues, who may not think around these issues in the way that we do. So I think it's a moment for the country to take stock of what it is, to say that this is real, this is where we are, this is also who we are. As hard as it may be for people in this country to think of themselves in that way, in the awful manner in which the documentary presented itself as not just undercurrents, but is an ideology or a set of ideologies that has great subscription. So I know, and it's not easy, but I think it's a moment to reflect, and then the harder conversations really start now around what you want to do and what you can do and what you should be doing. I am averse from a NatSec or a national security framework-based or a primary national security framework-based response. I think it needs to start with the community, at the community level, with the community, not talking to the community. It's a high-touch approach. Obviously, social media companies have to be part of it, but it's actually about what are the values that define us and how do we become or be better ancestors than we are today to those who come after us, and what are the values we should leave behind. That, I think, is a good starting point for what is otherwise a really difficult challenge.
Sanjana Hattotuwa, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for being available, and also for people who know me, George. I can see Chewy's in the chat as well. I always say, "Oh, we'll talk for 20 minutes, maybe 30." I tried my best to be honest tonight and say, "Look, be honest, it might be 40 minutes," and we've gone for over an hour. So it is what it is. But remember as well, people, that this is also an audio podcast. And the reason I tell you that tonight is you can head to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're on Rover as well. If you search for hashtag BHN, if you missed some of tonight's show, let's say you're driving to work tomorrow and you want to get the full show, really good way to do it is off the audio. As you'll have heard, when I'm showing imagery that we're watching, I also often mention what we're looking at and what we're seeing. So the whole audio from this is just ripped off at the end of each night, put into an audio podcast. I upload it literally tonight. It'll be there in about half an hour, ready to go. And you can subscribe to one of those platforms to get us an audio podcast as well. George, you're a beautiful man. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you participating. Sanjana, thank you very much for the work you're doing. And thank you for being involved in tonight's conversation. And I hope we get to do it again super soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks, George. Thanks, Pat.
So yeah.
Stay safe, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night.